Welcome to Leadership Lore, a series of speaker nights presenting the collective knowledge and wisdom on how you can have and make a difference in the lives of others around you. This series is in celebration of the President's Leadership Program's 25th anniversary, which comes up in 2025. I'm Trish Orman, Academic Director and a co-founder of the President's Leadership Program here at CSU Pueblo. Tonight, we are joined by Noah Atencio, the first full-time director of the President's Leadership Program here at CSU. Noah found us in 2001 when Pomar Foundation stepped up to build the program while I was finishing my dissertation. Noah is a graduate of the CU Boulder President's Leadership class, was a supportive fellow at Pomar Foundation, and when he came to Pueblo to spend a year in a full-time role, we welcomed him. But that was 23 years ago. Today, Noah is CEO of the Philanthropy Colorado, a recipient of the Robert W. Scrivener Award for Creative Grant-Making, and a Denver Business Journal 40 Under 40 awardee from 2008. But that's just a summary. We have invited Noah to talk to you and talk to Leadership Lore to share his stories and provide insight into the nonprofit world of Colorado, as well as tell you about his path. So I am pleased to welcome Noah Atencio to CSU Pueblo and to Leadership Lore.
Thank you, Trish. It feels really good to be with you all tonight. I'm Noah Atencio, and you know, watching you all come in this room tonight, and I was out in the room outside a little bit before this started, and seeing you all, it brought back a lot of memories for me. And you know, case in point, today I was at an event at Pomar Foundation. It's their annual statewide meeting, and there were community leaders from all over the state, and in the rooms that I was in, there were a number of people who I was in a leadership program with in college at CU Boulder. Katie Kramer from Betcher Foundation, for example, and I were on staff at the same time at CU Boulder. And the reason I bring that up is that the power of a program like this, or being in an honors program where you have this network of students who you connect with over the course of a year, or 2 years, or 4 years, creates these bonds that last a lifetime. And what I often refer to as networking has been the secret sauce for me in my success throughout my career. But I want to start with just telling you a little bit about myself, and I'm going to start with something that maybe I'm not so proud of, and that's I have a prejudiced mind. So I hope you're not like sitting here thinking to yourself like, okay, who is this guy on stage? You know, I don't need to listen to this anymore, but I don't want you to get the wrong idea. When I say a prejudiced mind, I'm not a prejudiced person, but I have the kind of mind that when I hear a good idea or something that makes sense to me, I lock onto it. And when I lock onto something, I don't lose it easily. So it could be something completely false, but it will take me a period of time to let go. And let me just give you a quick case in point. If you've been on the highways in recent months, you might see a sign that says, Colorado passed a new law, motorcycles can now pass stopped cars. And when I first saw that sign, I was looking at it and I thought to myself, oh, that's odd. So that means motorcycles used to have to stop, like when a cop pulled somebody over on the side of the road, or if there was a car stalled on the side of the road, a motorcycle had to stop. It makes no sense to me. And so I'd drive on, and I didn't put much more thought to it. But at that moment, the thought was ingrained in my head. And so the only thing I could picture was that a motorcyclist had to stop for some reason whenever there was a car stopped. And I didn't think much of it because I'm driving on the road and have plenty of other things to think about. But I saw that sign multiple times in the last few weeks. And every time I saw that sign, I either thought of the same thing again and was like still confused. And then finally, I started thinking about it differently. And all of a sudden I thought, well, I wonder if it means that when cars are stalled on the highway, right? Like if there's a car accident or if it's rush hour and everyone's stopped, then a motorcycle can pass through the cars. And all of a sudden I was thinking, okay. And so that made way more sense to me. And then I decided to look it up. And I looked it up, and lo and behold, that's exactly what it was. It's a law that allows a motorcycle to go in between cars on the highway as long as it goes to the left. And in that process, it was like the movement of me being stuck in this idea of thinking that needed time to change. And I'm really excited to be here because I've had about 24 years of time pass since I was here with this program as its first director. And I can look back now and see, like, how has my definition of certain things changed over time, or how have I changed as a person? And in particular, my concept of leadership is something that has changed very drastically from the time that I was here. And I'm going to get into that more, but I'm going to start by giving you this definition that was pretty ingrained in me when I was in college and when I came on to support this program. And that was the idea that a leader is a visionary who has an idea or concept that's going to benefit community, owns and holds that vision, and brings other people along to carry out that vision. And while on the surface that might sound like a decent definition of leadership, it has a lot of flaws. And so I'll illustrate that a little bit more as I go through. But first I want to talk a little bit about the history of this program and how it started. And there was a period in my life after college where I was a fellow at Pomar Foundation. And Pomar is a remarkable organization. It's a private foundation up in Colorado Springs. Its history goes back 80 plus years. Spencer and Julie Penrose were two philanthropists. Spencer got his money in copper and was the equivalent of like an Elon Musk today in terms of how much wealth he had in the 1930s. But when he passed, he left the foundation to do good for Colorado by supporting the well-being of Coloradans. And so their investments are all over. You might see Pomar's name when you're in Colorado Springs or maybe even here in Pueblo. In the late 80s, Pomar started a fellowship program to develop future leaders who would go out and support not only philanthropy and the nonprofit sector, but also business and other industry. And so I had the opportunity to be a fellow. And during that time, there was an interest in creating leadership programs all over the state of Colorado. And the plan was to replicate the leadership program that I was involved in Boulder. And so at that time, I was involved with a team of some community leaders, the current leader of the program up in Boulder, and other fellows in the design of what these leadership programs would look like all over the state. And during that time, I got to experience, I wasn't in a leadership position, and so I wasn't really in the mindset of like, all right, well, how am I going to make this work and how this vision? But I got to go along for the ride and really learn, what would make a solid leadership program. And so there was some tenets that were built, and CSU Pueblo was one of the colleges that Pomar wanted to work with to expand these leadership programs statewide. And so at that time, Dr. Orman, Trish, was going to build the program out, working with the leadership here at the campus, and was going on sabbatical. And so Pomar loaned me out to start the program. And in those early stages, we were up in where this program has been for a number of years. And I was working with just another student, Attila, and we had this kind of clean slate in front of us. I had this idea of what this could look like. I saw the potential because of all the experiences I had in the program in Boulder, as well as at the Fellowship of Pomar. But it wasn't until the students really came on and I got to know them that I really started seeing, why we're doing this and the value of this. And again, going back to that idea of networking, the relationships we build together is what makes something really great. And that became part of those lessons that really brought me through my career. And so I'm going to quickly walk through my career. When I was in my second year of running this program, actually I'll back up a second and share a few stories about how the program developed. And I don't want to bore you, but there's certain things that, to me, I think, when you think about your role as a leader and where when you leave this college and you go on into your work life, the kind of community involvement you can be involved in, or the kind of organizations you get involved in, there's some things that are kind of common around all of that. And part of that is really having a sense of the purpose of what you're trying to accomplish, and then working with others to be involved in the build and the design of that. And so very early on, we had a number of people involved in the development of the program. We had an interim academic director, we had student support, and we had a model of how we wanted the program to look. And so the students that were involved were both involved academically, but we started throwing in new ideas and ways to approach, the beginning of the year, for example, by having a retreat on the first weekend. And those are the things that started building tradition into the program. I'm going to get some water. But for me, I was about 25 years old at that time, and there was a lot of responsibility that I put on myself that was really unnecessary. I felt like the sense that, and I'm going to go back to that definition of leadership, right? That I had, that I had to have this vision, and that I had to make this thing successful. And I put all this weight on my shoulder, and I had this sense of responsibility that started changing the way I behaved. And so this was one of the first lessons I had in this reformation of my idea of leadership over the years. And that's, I had this sense that if I could, empower my team to carry on this vision that I had in my head, that everything would be successful. But the problem with that is that when you start to define empowerment as getting people to do something that you have in your head, all of a sudden you become an instructor and you're not really empowering. And so a lot of the lessons I had to learn was that, I had to let people bring their ideas and their creativity into the process. And so when I hired on a student staff member, Felicia Garcia, for example, she had a lot of ideas, and she was a marketing student, she was in the business school, and I was at first weary to let her kind of run with these ideas. But as I started letting go of that notion that I had to be in control, or that I had to instruct her on how things needed to be done, she started developing amazing products. She started when we did our strategic planning, she formatted it all and she helped design the structure of it. And all of a sudden, that weight that was on my shoulders started to relax a little bit. And as I started to relax, I started to be able to see that, my vision for this program might be a little bit flawed. It might be like that sign that I read with the motorcycle that, people aren't parked on the side of the road and motorcycles don't have to stop, right? Maybe we can bring in, more ideas or involve the community more in our work. And so one of the first things we did was build a community advisory group. And that group itself was made up of leaders from Pueblo. And at that time, we were very privileged to have a lot of financial support on the scholarship side and even on the program side from Pomar Foundation. And again, that same thought started coming up to me that I needed to influence this advisory group. I needed to mold them and instruct them on how to support our program. And while there's always an element of truth as a leader that you need to be able to help people understand the purpose, the goals, there's also the opportunity you never want to lose, which is to involve everybody in the process. And so a lot of that first year lesson for me was that I would have an advisory group meeting and I'd have it all planned out. I would show them the strategic plan. I'd tell them that we need to raise $40,000 or some other amount. And I would say, all right, let's go do this. And everyone was like, great. But nobody was really bought in. Nobody really had that sense of like, okay, we really need to own this as a community and we need to help these students be successful. A lot of what I communicated to them, the way that I presented plans, the way that I was so organized in those days of early days, was communicating to them that I've got this, that I'm okay, and I can do it on my own. And I think that's one of the other major lessons that I learned at that time was that I can't do things on my own. Like if I do things on my own, I am destined for failure. And that failure doesn't just show up as like, it doesn't happen. Oftentimes it will happen. I like force of will, right? Like I'm going to get this thing done no matter what. I'm going to stay up at multiple hours, or I'm going to manipulate people into doing the work, and that's damaging, right, to relationships. And so there was a lot of lessons that I got to learn through this time period. But one thing that I was grateful for was that there was a ton of support from the college, university, from the foundation, and from the community. And the students themselves, like being able to have this experience and really kind of create this container for students to grapple with these concepts of leadership is really the reason we were there and why we're doing it and why this program exists today. So I'll walk you through a little bit more of my career, and I'm going to go by it pretty quickly because it's kind of a run of a resume, but there's been some really interesting and cool things that I've been able to experience over the last 24 years. So after the second year of running this program, I had what you might experience at some point in your life, which I call a quarter-life crisis. So I was at this point where I was like, do I need to go to graduate school now? Do I need to be doing something else? Should I be in Colorado still? And my brother was living in Pittsburgh at the time, and he was in law school. I think he was just finishing up. And so I decided to move out to Pittsburgh and start studying for the LSAT and see if law school was right for me. And while I was in Pittsburgh, there was one thing that I realized really quickly is that I did not want to be in Pittsburgh. I don't know if many of you have been to Pittsburgh, but if you've lived in Colorado your whole life, it's like you're in a bowl constantly. And if you walk out of these rooms tonight and you look, you'll see, endless horizon to the east. There's beautiful mountainous landscape with a seemingly endless sky above, right? And I was living in this like new geography where I felt like I could never see the sky. And so it was little things like that that helped me realize that I needed to be back in Colorado. And so reaching back out to that network and trusting the people that I've built relationships with, I went back to Pomar Foundation and said, hey, I'm moving back to Colorado. If there's any opportunity to support the foundation, please let me know. And in that like act of humility, I put myself out there, and Pomar responded back and said, hey, yeah, we are doing a new program that we're calling Regional Councils. We have a project going on down in the San Luis Valley in Alamosa. We're working with the Intel Corporation, and we're starting these really cool computer clubhouses within youth programs. So I was brought back on, and the foundation sent me down to Alamosa. I rented a house. I was officed in that house, and I started meeting with the community. And again, building that network, which is another just common theme of how my career has developed. And one of the first things I did while I was there was I organized meetings with as many community members and nonprofit leaders that I could find. that would be willing to meet with me. We'd have coffee. I'd find out about the work they did. I'd found out about what were the needs in the community, and I started documenting it for the foundation. Meanwhile, I started developing this project with Intel to identify a youth-serving organization in the Valley that could take on this computer clubhouse program, and we ended up selecting the Boys and Girls Club. So at that time, my path was moving towards being the director of that computer clubhouse program. And for me, you know, if you haven't already kind of sensed, I kind of have a big ego. I have this, you know, like this sense of self, right? Like that I have to do something great, you know, that I was in a leadership program and I was a fellow and I have to be something. And so the prospect of kind of moving from a larger market in Colorado Springs and Pueblo into a very small town and running that program was a little bit nerve-wracking for me, but I said to the leadership at El Pomar, look, if there's any opportunity that I could serve the foundation in any other capacity, or if you have any other connections, please keep me in mind. And so my loyalty to the foundation was really what kept me moving in this direction, and we were able to get the program off the ground. And I had some really, like, I guess providence kind of kicked in around that time. So this was 2004. And at that time, I was introduced to my wife by that student I mentioned, Felicia, who was supporting me in this program. She had moved to Denver after she graduated from CSU Pueblo and met my wife. They became quick friends, and my wife said, well, I'm looking, you know, I would like to date somebody, and she described the person she'd like to date, and it was someone like me. So, yay. So I was driving up to Denver for, you know, this was like April of 2004, and the program was getting off the ground and everything was looking good. And so I started commuting up to Denver to date this lovely woman, and this was end of April that I met her, and by July 1st, I was hired at the Daniels Fund, which is another large private foundation in our state that does scholarships as well as grant making in 4 different states as well as nationally. And I was brought onto the grants team at the Daniels Fund. And so I started at Daniels Fund on July 1st and moved up to Denver and was on a new path around grant making. And you know, for me, that was like putting myself out into the universe, not like letting go of that sense of self, that sense that was saying, you know, you've got to be the one running the show, or you've got to be the one that's going to, like, you know, make your life happen. A lot of that period of time in 2004 for me was the letting go of all of that. It was saying, I'm committed to serving El Pomar Foundation no matter what. If this program is meant to be, then I will run this program. And then the opportunity came up, and I got the call from the CEO of El Pomar Foundation saying that Daniels Fund's looking for somebody. I mentioned you, and they interviewed me and hired me. And so, again, just like when I get out of my own way, that's usually when the concept of leadership starts to kick in my life. And I don't know how to explain it. Maybe as I continue to talk, it'll make more sense. So I had this amazing opportunity with the Daniels Fund. The Daniels Fund also was founded by a very wealthy entrepreneur who built his empire in the cable industry, Bill Daniels. And Bill Daniels was an enormously generous man, and he was a man who had faults, and he was a man who understood business. He went bankrupt maybe 5 times in his life, and always built back. And it was very inspiring to be able to work for an organization that was carrying on the legacy of this great man. And so I led different portfolios of grant making. I had the state of Utah. I worked with our grants that were related to homelessness, to early childhood education, to alcoholism and substance abuse in the state of Colorado, and supported regions of the state. So I was able to go back into communities like the San Luis Valley, and all those relationships that I had built in 2004 kicked back in, because now I was in a role of a program officer working with these nonprofits who were seeking funds, and I had that relationship built with them. And so when they applied for funds, I knew them, they were known entities, I understood the work they did, and I was able to support their requests by bringing those opportunities to the board at the Daniels Fund. And we were able to invest a lot of grant dollars throughout Colorado. And I did that for almost 10 years. And I learned some lessons there as well. And going back to the same theme about ego and how I get in the way of myself. I was promoted to assistant vice president at the Daniels Fund about 2 or 3 years into my time there. And while I was in that position, I had to start managing like my peers. Like up to that point, I was a program officer on a team of program officers, and the leadership structure started to change such that I was in this kind of quasi-management position. But whenever my team, like the team didn't like something I was doing, they just went back up to our boss, like who was still the boss. And so, you know, again, I was like I didn't really ask myself at that time, like, why if someone doesn't like what I'm doing, are they going to our boss? And I didn't question my own behavior. I was just frustrated, and I didn't really understand what was happening. And so I'd have these conversations with my boss and say, well, like, I don't know why this is happening. I need you to do something. And all of a sudden, I was giving all my power away, right? Like, and I had to learn this lesson because I'm a slow learner. I get stuck in my head about things, and it takes time to rebuild it. And so during that period of time, I was effectively like given more responsibilities in the kind of program officer space, and there was changes in leadership, and you know, I continued on in my role, and I had a lesser degree of managing my peers. And so for me, that was like one of those times in my career where there was a lesson to be learned, and I struggled with that. But I had these moments of realization that, you know, again, when I start to focus on myself, when I focus on my own behaviors, my motivations, the things that are getting in the way of myself, and take that time to process that. And oftentimes it requires processing with other people, frankly. And I developed a lot of mentorship in that period of my life. And so during that time, I was able to start to change. And like a great thing happened to me during that period of time. From about 2011 to 2014, I had this new boss, and she had come in from outside the foundation. She had been a banker, and she didn't know a lot about grant making. And so I had all this prejudice, right, around her capabilities. And I was struggling with the fact that I had been kind of relieved of that kind of managerial duty. And because I went through that process of self-reflection, of looking at really my part and looking at how, you know, my behavior was impacting the results that I was seeing, I don't think she changed one iota in that 3-year period of time. But by the time that I left the organization, I was crying because I cared so deeply about this person and respected her so much. And again, when she came in, I thought, you know, she doesn't know what she's doing, and I don't like her, and this, that, and the other. And so the only thing that changed was not her, but me. And that's so important. It's something I want to impart with all of you, that we have these opportunities in life when we think we're struggling with some aspect of ourselves, to be able to take that and kind of throw it out into the universe, throw it out to other people, and process it with other people, because it's not the kind of thing you can do as alone, right? Like if you're struggling with something and you're trying to solve that problem, you can't. It's not a solvable problem because you got yourself into the problem in the first place. And so, again, like thinking about how is that starting to change my concept of leadership, it's starting to change that idea that I need to empower people which was really instruct people into, I need to start talking to people and bringing people into the ideas I have. And when I bring people into the idea, it's not my vision anymore. It becomes our vision. It becomes something that we start to build together. And when we start building together, all those deficiencies that I have, maybe my inability or lack of ability to manage, can be picked up by the person who is good at that, right? And so that's how I started to change in that concept of leadership. And around 2014, because I had continued to build this large network professionally, I was on the Denver Drug Strategy Commission at that time, and one of my colleagues was at Community First Foundation on that commission with me, and she was an executive vice president at the foundation, and that foundation was going through a major transition. They were going to be part of this big hospital conversion, which would result in about $300 million going to the foundation, which would have then enabled this much smaller community foundation to become a large grant-making organization similar to El Pomar and similar to the Daniels Fund. And because I built those relationships, when she knew that she was ready to hire someone to come in and build that grants program, she thought of me and she called me and she said, I want you to apply for this. And so I applied for the position, I interviewed, and I was selected. And so fast forwarding, I want to wrap this up and get to a conclusion. I just saw that my time was running around too. So I think I want to leave you with one quick story about how my leadership has transformed to the point now where in my role, I can see that leadership is about that process of bringing people together, of not owning the vision, but once that vision is created, I do everything in my power to make the people successful in creating that vision together and acting on that vision together. And so one of the programs that I did at the Community Foundation was called the Innovator Society, and we involved the whole community in our grant-making process. And it was very innovative to the point where we had an audience of about 280 community leaders actually grant-making in real time. So we kind of like through the whole old model of like bringing a grant opportunity to your trustees and involving the whole community to crowdsource these really innovative ideas around mental health. And it put our name out in the community that we were doing this type of work. And because of that, I received a national award and was recognized for that work. But it wasn't because I had some great idea. It was because I had transformed as a person to the point as a leader where I understood that if I bring people into the process, if I empower people, true empowerment, where it's not my idea, but our idea, then great things happen. And I get to carry the mantle for that in my role or in my position, but I don't have to own it. And so I thank you for this opportunity to talk with you tonight. And I really want to open this up for some dialogue and some questions and would love to hear from you all.
So you talk a lot about reflecting on yourself and leadership, but what does that process of reflection look like? Whether that be after the end of a year or after something happens, how do you really take a deep dive so that you can kind of take it and actually move forward with it?
Yeah, there's kind of, I call it like the 3 A's. There's an awareness that you need to first have around it, right? So sometimes that awareness could be like, I just don't feel good about this. Or sometimes the awareness is that somebody's telling you, you're being a dip, whatever, right? And other times it could just be like, you wake up in the morning and you just have this like epiphany that like something's not right, or something's not going the way. Then comes acceptance, right? Because there's a point in that awareness where it's like the problem is there, it's sitting there, right? You don't know what to do with it, and there's really only thing you can do. It's just to accept it And that process of acceptance is where other people get involved. That process isn't something that is necessarily like, you can't just go maybe to like, for people who have like a prayer life, like you can maybe hand it over to that concept of God or whatever that is, the universe. But until you kind of voice that to somebody else, so that's where mentorship comes in, friends, closed-mouth friends, people that you can talk to. That's when that opportunity kicks in for the acceptance to start to work, and then action. And so like awareness, acceptance, and action. And the action is oftentimes just doing the next right thing, right? Like that next thing that's different from what you were doing before. And sometimes that's just being humble enough to listen to what that mentor is telling you to do, or that friend, and trying it and seeing how it goes. Other times it could be, going to therapy, or it could be going to maybe even starting a whole new certificate program or something that puts you in a new direction in your career path. But it's always that process, right? Like, you have to be aware of it, you have to get to a process of accepting it, and then you have to start to take the action.
Do you think that having to go through the process of realizing that you were in your own way has changed you and developed you in a way that you wouldn't have gone through if, let's say, you weren't in your own way to begin with? Does that make sense? So, if you had to learn, okay, I'm my own roadblock, right?
Yeah.
And then after learning that, do you think that that outcome is different than if you were never in your way in the first place?
I think that depends. I think part of it, if I understand the question, is that if you were never in your way in the first place, then you might assume that the outcome was as it should be. But I think for me and my experience in life is that, again, I started off with that idea that there's something about me, there's just who I am that has that kind of prejudiced mindset that and I think we all have it, right? We all have biases, we all have prejudice. It's a common thing as a human being to have these elements to ourselves. But the getting in the way of myself in that process is that I accept that definition way too early. So I think for me, if I didn't think I was in the way, I think I'd still be wrong from the start. We need each other. We are leaders in this program and in this world, not because we're here to be a shining star or to be some unique thing for other people. We're here as leaders to remind ourselves that we need each other. Leadership isn't about doing something for others. Leadership is about doing things together. It's the way as humans we organize. It's the way that we get things done together. It's the way we build community. It's the way we build family, friendship. It's something that we have to breathe in and out of every day. So it's not healthy, or it wasn't for me, to start with these kind of preconceived biases about how I think I needed to behave in the world. I had to let go of that in order to be the leader that I need to be.
You mentioned a few times building networking, and I was wondering, what advice would you give to people who are maybe just starting their college careers or are looking to get involved and develop their networking?
Dale Carnegie. And that's not a joke. I did the Dale Carnegie program twice. And I did it early when I was at the Daniels Fund, so around 2005. And it was just a weekend program. But one of the things about the Dale Carnegie program is that it's all about human relations. And they actually give you very concrete tools on how to network, how to be in a room and be genuinely interested in somebody else and ask them questions. And there's a pathway to it. And so for me, I needed to learn those tools before I could be effective in networking. I think I started off with, thankfully, a positive bias around people, that I genuinely like people, I'm genuinely interested in people, and I want to get to know people, but I needed those tools. And so a program like Dale Carnegie or some other program where you might be able to develop some of those toolkits around like, how do you just ask somebody? And like for example, in Dale Carnegie, we learned that, the most important word in the world to somebody is their name. And so the first thing you do is ask somebody their name. And then the next most important thing to most people is their family. And so you ask people about their family and their family life, or where they're from, where's home. And then you talk to them about their education, or you talk to them about hobbies. But you don't start off with like, hey, where do you work? Because that's probably the fourth or fifth thing that somebody cares about, and you might lose them pretty quick, or your eyes might glaze over, depending. I was getting nervous about that, by the way, talking about my career history for that reason, because for me, what I get delighted about is talking about, my family or things like that.
So you mentioned that at the beginning of like your career and going into life when you're having your quarter life crisis, that you're focused on, you're thinking like you had to do something big, you were meant to do something big. And now you're mentioning like, wow, like the career is probably the fourth most important thing that I have to think about. So I guess my question to you is like, what changed that, and how has that shaped your perspective on your purpose and how you approach life?
Yeah, I think for me I think there's a lot of things that change it. A lot of it is those moments that I shared with you. I wanted to be purposeful in sharing those events in my career that had consequence to them, right? Like that my behavior was such that I didn't accomplish something, or that I struggled through something. And I think in that vein, if I understand the question, is that's where I start to understand how I need to change.
Yeah, it was just kind of like what things actually influence that. And I think a lot of us at this age, we're all very career focused because that's what's being pushed on us.
Yes.
But as I speak to people like you, they're like, you know what, you get older and you experience life and you realize that's actually not the most important thing. And so it's just like, what kind of things made you realize that?
Yeah, I mean, having a family of my own, I think having like struggles that weren't work related, that I had to like grapple with, like familial relationships and things like that. Just like it's not that work's not important, because work for me is a huge part of my identity. But I think the difference for me today is that I don't think of the relationships around my profession as means to getting my goals met, right? Like I think of, my team that I work with as people who have lives and jobs, and their job isn't to make me look good. Their job is to be fulfilled. They're looking for fulfillment just like I am. And so that changes my perspective about how I show up to work with them. And when I think about, if we have a big project in front of us, I think about how do we build in some space so that not everybody is like burning the candle at both ends, right? And so that's my job, to do that. And so I think that embracing work in your profession as something that you can be fulfilled in is very important. Like I don't want to communicate that that's like second on the list. But what I mean is especially when you're talking to somebody, like they don't care about your work, right? Like they care about I care about my work. And if I started telling you about my work, I might go on for 10 minutes and your eyes might glaze over. So what I want to clear up there is that when you're meeting somebody for the first time and networking with them, it's the idea that they're a human first. You want to connect with them on a very human level. And then as you start to talk about work, what often happens, especially for me in the networks that I'm part of, is that we start to think about ways to collaborate together. All of a sudden, oh, well, maybe we should work on this project together, or maybe I can bring my organization in to support this program you're doing. And so that's I hope that's clarifying, because I know when you're at this stage of life, jobs, especially when you're in college and you're thinking about your career, it's like daunting, right? Because you don't have that path. It's not written for you. It's not there. But what I feel like the through line for me throughout my career so far is that the relationships I build with people lead me into those jobs, and they lead me into those opportunities. So all of a sudden, it's not about me being, a level 3 technician in this type of industry. It's that I became a level 3 technician because I was really interested in this person's, how they approach their work, and they sat down with me for coffee and told me about being a level 3 technician, and it was like, holy crap, that sounds so much fun. I want to do it. So it's like the people, the relationships that bring you into that.
So my question is, how do you think your family has impacted your leadership? Like, do you think they changed it at all from when you were younger before them?
Yes, and so my family is, I think if I follow the pathway of my career, my family started with, my nuclear family of parents and siblings, nieces and nephews. At that point in my life, I was really involved and, active in my nieces and nephews' lives. And then as I met my wife, kind of in my late 20s, that created family in a whole different dimension for me. And I think the level of responsibility involved in becoming married and starting to have children, it does change the perspective I have around what a leader is, because especially with your spouse, it's like you both have this idea of what a perfect life is or a perfect marriage, and all of a sudden you're in it, and that idea kind of goes a little bit down, right? Like, it's not an idea anymore. It's like, we're in this, and it's like, I don't know if I think I've probably made more. If I could spend another hour talking about the mistakes I've made as a spouse than in terms of leadership, because you can't lead your wife. I'll just tell you that. You cannot do that. And it's not how it works. So this has been special. I really appreciate this. You guys are amazing. What you're doing for this community by just being in this program is going to make a huge difference. So thank you for giving me the honor of being with you tonight. Appreciate it.
We hope that Noah's going to join us next year as well as we get into our official 25th. But I want to thank you all for being here tonight and enjoying leadership lore with us. Good questions. And we'll see you all next time, and have a good evening. Thanks again for being here. And one more thing, I want to thank Media and Entertainment Department for not only helping us with the staging and the setup for this, but for being such a partner with us this semester. It's been wonderful. Thank you, John and others. Thank you very much.